be willing to do what you think not many would, and eventually people are going to see that. I often hear people say like, hey, I don't want to go back to the ICU. I have my experience. I'm doing this now, but I'm having trouble getting interviews and stuff. And in my head with those, it's like you need to do what you think that the school wants at the end of the day. And if you think that is going back to the ICU, then you should do that, because everyone else you're competing with probably is, and try to stand yourself out from that and do even more, like go to a state meeting or do something, research or anything like that. So just try to go above and beyond what you think the average applicant's doing.
Hey, future CRNA, welcome to the CSPA podcast. CSPA has helped over 3,000 nurses like you gain acceptance into schools across the country. Tune in for inspiration and actionable takeaways to help you from start to finish.
Hello and welcome back, future CRNA. So excited to have you on today's show. I have a very special guest today, Dalton, who is going to share with you his story, his journey to CRNA success. Welcome, Dalton, to the show.
Thank you.
So I am so excited to have him here today. Dalton was a part of our 12-month intensive program. And if you're unfamiliar, that program does guarantee your acceptance if you complete the program in its entirety, or you get your money back. It's a money back guarantee because we fully believe in our product and what we can do for our students. So welcome, Dalton. We're so excited to have you. And we're going to kick this off by just having you share your nursing background and kind of, what led you to pursue CRNA.
Yeah, so what led me to pursue CRNA was I was about a sophomore in nursing school at the point. I didn't even know CRNA was a thing. I was just studying with my friend, and her mom was a CRNA, and she told me to shadow her. So I thought it was just awesome when I shadowed her, and I was kind of asking her for advice, and she gave me some advice. And the one thing that stuck with me was she said that the hardest thing about CRNA school is getting into school. And I didn't really understand it at that moment because I was just focused on nursing school, but I did end up realizing that afterwards. And my nursing background, I was 1 year in the emergency department. That's where I trained at when I was a new grad and my senior rotation. And then I switched to the ICU because I was pretty dead set on wanting to become CRNA, and I knew that was what I would have to do. And right now, 1 year and 3 months into ICU.
Woohoo! That's exciting. So for those of you listening who are unsure about applying to CRNA school early on in your journey, yes, you can. This is living proof here that you do not have to have that average of 3 years to apply to CRNA school. And I'm thankful for you sharing your ER background and the fact that you knew that ICU was the kind of the route you had to go to achieve your dream. I also think it's really cool that you started with the shadow experience. And I think a lot of students struggle because I think they need to have a unique story. I had surgery and a CRNA did my epidural or whatever it was, but you don't necessarily have to have that unique story. The unique story is that you were lit up with a passion when you saw CRNAs in action. And that's I can relate to that in so many ways. That's kind of how I got started, where I was just like, wow, this is a nurse behind the drape. I never knew. And just that passion of knowing that a nurse could do that role was exciting enough for me equally to investigate further. So I love that. What would you say during this entire thing, as you mentioned, getting to school being the hardest part of pursuing CRNA, what did you feel like your biggest obstacle was along this journey?
So I think I have a tie. It's imposter syndrome. I wanted to say that because I think everyone has that. And I would say two would be lack of support, which is a good thing that I joined that program because I felt like there's a lot of support in the program, which I felt like was much needed. It's really easy to have imposter syndrome no matter where you're at. You could be the most experienced nurse, or you could be 1 year in like me. And I've heard time after time through people in CSPA and just in my unit of not thinking you're good enough and everything. And what I've realized is a lot of persistence is the key to it, even though it's hard to think about in the moment.
I love that share. Thank you so much. And you're 100% right. There are so many aspiring CRNAs who are doubting themselves, who are feeling overwhelmed with the idea that, is it even possible? Should I put this time, effort into something that I may not be able to achieve? And that mindset right there is going to limit you. So you have to work on that mindset, knowing that this is possible. You can achieve it. It is about persistence. It is about determination. And one thing that I can say from coaching you so much, Dalton, and something that I would love our listeners to kind of really take to heart, is what really struck me about you. And the fact that I knew 110% you would find success is because you were so open to feedback and you always took it with a smile, even though I know sometimes it was hard to hear that, okay, maybe this is what you have to do. It's not going to be the easiest thing to do or the thing you really want to do, but this is what I think you should do. You always took it with a smile. And I think that that's the key aspect is you have to be willing and open for feedback. You have to seek out support. But when you do seek out support, you have to be open and willing to reflect on your weaknesses, which sometimes can be painful to do. And I just want to highlight that. I thought you were very receptive to feedback, which is a very good signal because when you're in CRNA school, you're going to equally receive a lot of feedback, during clinical and even during the academic portion. And you have to be able to take that feedback with a smile and with it not destroying your confidence and who you know you are. And I think when you have what I call a fixed mindset, you let your achievements or who you are define you. When you have a growth mindset, you say, okay, I got some feedback, but that means I have room to grow. That means I have room to improve, and that's a good thing. And so I think that, if anyone listening can focus a lot on adapting of growth mindset over a fixed mindset. And it's easy to do, you guys. We all live in the fixed mindset at some point, and being in imposter syndrome itself is a fixed mindset. And so I think that we all, again, are guilty of being there. So yeah, I appreciate that share. And I would love to kind of reflect a little bit. You said you didn't feel like you had a lot of support. How was joining the 12-month intensive? I guess let's back up. What motivated you? Was it the lack of support that motivated you to join the 12-month intensive?
So I followed CSPA for about a year or two before I even heard about the 12-month intensive. And then I started seeing advertisements about it. And when I first saw the advertisement about it, I was still in the ER, so I didn't really think much about it. And then I saw another thing of it's been 100%. Everyone who's joined this program has gotten in. So then I was like, okay, I need to read a little bit more into this thing. And then I kind of read everything you get and the fact that your money does come back if you don't get into school. And it just kind of felt like such a little amount for me to sacrifice to get into school. And if I didn't get into school, then I get my money back and I get a bunch of education and knowledge for the next cycle anyways. So I think it was that. I didn't honestly realize how much support I would get in the program, but all of the things prior motivated me to want to join.
Awesome. I love to hear. Yes. And we've been doing this, you guys, now for almost 2 years. We're coming up on our 2-year anniversary, actually, in the next month. And so far, everyone who has completed the program, we do hold you accountable to do our courses and as well as 2 mock interviews, and then attend faculty office hours. We essentially want to make sure that you're getting what you paid for. We want you to get the results, which means you have to receive the coaching. But it involves faculty coaches as a part of this program, including myself, and during our weekly mentor sessions as well. So there's a lot of touch points in this program, as well as a very outlined roadmap of what we know to be what successful students are doing to achieve success. So that is so exciting, and I'm grateful that our advertisements worked. And here you are, accepted to CRNA school. And I would love to know, what did you feel like during your journey helped you feel like you could stand out to the interview panel or as an applicant?
Things that I felt that helped me stand out was just little things that the program would teach me and just other things that your videos taught me, such as whenever I went to open houses, I knew what questions not to ask, things that were on the website of the CRNA school. And when people asked that, I was just like, oh my God, that wasn't just an obvious thing not to ask. And then going to a state CRNA meeting, when I did that, I was the only nurse in the whole CRNA meeting. So I was like, everything the CSPA was teaching me was putting me in the top 5%, it felt like, and it kind of was giving me a lot of motivation that I was on the right path and I was going to do it eventually.
I love that. And it is about the little things, you guys. That's why I think it doesn't seem obvious, because it's things that are not widely looked at because they're not listed as a requirement. They're not required. They're not even listed, period, on any school's websites. So it's usually about the little unique things that are not disclosed that can really make you stand out. Similarly, going to open houses and not asking questions that you can easily find on the website, for example, is a big one, because it just kind of shows that you're not, digging into the website yourself and kind of enriching and kind of being a self motivator to educate yourself. But yeah, and going to open houses, that's just huge. You'd be surprised at how many applicants do not ever go to an open house, and yet they apply to all these schools. And it seems so simple to me, but I get it. Sometimes it means traveling, right? Which is hard. But a lot of schools are offering virtual open houses. So really there's no barrier to go other than time. So it does help you stand out. So I love that. It's really about the little tiny nuances along the way that can really set your applicant apart or application. Because at the end of the day, everyone's going to have the ICU experience. Everyone's going to have the GPA. Everyone's going to have, the CCRN. I've heard from program faculty that it looks like a lot of apples, right? And it's just a matter of how shiny is that apple versus it's still an apple, right? They're all apples, but which one's the crispest, best, juiciest apple is kind of what they have to then decipher from all the little tiny things that kind of help it stand out. What are some lessons learned that if you knew now, you would do something differently back when you first started this journey?
I would say lessons learned. We learned a lot about emotional intelligence in the intensive program and read some books on it too. I'd say a mindset frame that I was able to shift near the end was, instead of worrying about like, what if this happens and everything's gonna crash and burn, just think of, because it's impossible for me not to think about what ifs, but I do think of, okay, if that does happen, what am I going to do to help myself and still succeed? So instead of just thinking about crashing and burning, I'm going to think about, if I crash and burn, what am I going to do to pick myself up after that? So I would say if I was able to give myself that mindset earlier on, it probably would have made the process a little bit less stressful, but that's what helped me a lot.
I love that. And that's, you guys, this is something that you can all do, and it's free. That's the beauty of working on mindset. And there's so many resources, whether that's YouTube or books, working on, again, a growth mindset, emotional intelligence, reflecting on who you are. And at the end of the day, I see a lot of applicants put so much pressure on themselves to be successful at the very first time. And the reality is, what's so bad about failing? There's really nothing bad about failing unless you make it feel bad. And so you are in control of how you feel about what occurs in your life. And that goes for really everything. And so it's kind of reframing it as in the fact that, okay, if I'm not successful, there's going to be another chance. If I'm not successful, I'm going to learn something from that failure. It's so weird to me because a lot of times you grow up playing sports, right? And yes, you always want to win, but you don't I just think over time you do it enough to where you get used to failing every now and then to you're like, it's no big deal if I fail. There'll be another time. Where I feel like this, you don't apply to CRNA school all the time or as you grow up. So I feel like this feels like such a giant monumental task, something that maybe it's a one time and your only shot. But the reality is there is going to be more than one chance. And as long as you set yourself up to know what the school's requirements are, meaning do they have an application limit? Do they have an interview limit, right? If you know those things prior to going into it, you should rest assured that there's going to be another opportunity. So I think that that's awesome that you shared that. What advice, if anything, could you leave our listeners as far as people who are considering this career path, considering, do I go back to the ICU? Do I take more courses? And, sometimes it feels like a big mountain to climb. What's some parting advice you would leave?
For me, I would say just be willing to do what you think not many would, and eventually people are going to see that. I often hear people say like, hey, I don't want to go back to the ICU. I have my experience. I'm doing this now, but I'm having trouble getting interviews and stuff. And in my head with those, it's like, you need to do what you think that the school wants at the end of the day. And if you think that is going back to the ICU, then you should do that, because everyone else you're competing with probably is, and try to stand yourself out from that and do even more, like go to a state meeting or do something, research or anything like that. So just try to go above and beyond what you think the average applicant's doing.
I love that. Great parting advice. And it's sometimes hard to accept when you know it's going to be costly or time consuming to do these things, or even things you just know that you don't want to do, right? I mean, maybe you were burnt out in the ICU, and I'm not suggesting anybody who's in a really bad mental point to go back to the ICU, or I've even talked to students who had to leave the ICU due to a physical injury, right? So there are certain circumstances that make those movements much harder, but that's when you need to be upfront with the program, that there's a reason as to why you either mentally or physically would be unwell for you to go back to the ICU. And I think you need to be upfront about any issues like that when you're actively applying, so they understand this is not coming from a place of you not wanting to go above and beyond, but because maybe there's a mental or physical reason why you physically shouldn't. Other thing to be said too is, I often tell students sometimes, I run into students sometimes who are like, oh, Jenny, but the ICU, the level 1 trauma ICU is an hour from me. I'm like, but that's also where the school is usually. Usually the schools are kind of pocketed around cities. And so those cities tend to have higher level ICUs. And so unfortunately, the majority of the applicants will come from those cities. And so not that, getting rural experience, by all means, I'm not saying that's not good enough. A lot of times it can be, but you have to be really careful because you're, again, going up against all these applicants who have known level 1, level 2 trauma experience where those schools don't have to question whether or not it's high acuity. And just to touch on this too, since I know you were relatively new in your ICU experience when you applied, sometimes units are not what I call CRNA pathway friendly. Sometimes that means bullying. Sometimes that means not giving the most acute assignments to you because they know you're pursuing CRNA. You have to remain persistent. You have to, kind of like what you did, Dalton, is you put yourself in a position to learn. Even if that's just going into rooms, you guys, and picking up on little nuances that someone's training on ECMO. Put yourself in those positions. Seek out opportunities for research. Contact your CNS. Contact a fellow attending. See what they're working on. See if you can volunteer your services, your help, your time. You can often do little things like that go a long way. Even if you feel like you're facing adversity in your unit, because I know a lot of you are, you can find ways around that. Stay persistent. You can do it. Just because you're facing adversity there does not mean it's the end. I often also see students leave their ICU in the middle of application thinking maybe it's not the best ICU. And sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes it's really hindersome because now you have to start all over again getting a reference letter. And that can really set you back at an entire application cycle. So you have to be really, really careful when you make that decision to leave an ICU versus just trying your best, even if it's not ideal. So I wanted to leave those parting advice for those listening. And thank you, Dalton, so very much. I'm so incredibly proud of you. Congratulations. And I look forward to following your journey as you progress.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to head over to CRNAschoolprepacademy.com to gather free resources to help you on your CRNA journey. Stay strong. We're rooting for you, future CRNA.